not gonna waste your time. Shattered Space is incredibly disappointing. There, for those of you waiting for my blunt review, you can head back to Skyrim or whatever you were doing. But now I offer you a critique from one of the few who beat Shattered Space. And it's not great. The campaign is short, like beat it on the hardest difficulty in 6 hours short. But the worst part about it, it's only that long because of how stretched out it is. The first hour is great, a fantastic intro to the expansion that makes you feel like something big is about to go down, you're really gonna be on a crazy adventure. Just to be immediately dropped into a city, and I say that lightly, with just a couple people wandering around, another typical Starfield town with very little going on. The whole campaign from that point forward is dialogue. Starfield takes what could have been said in 2 sentences, like how Skyrim and Fallout were, and expands it not only to minutes of rambling, but after you just got the incredibly mundane rundown from one NPC, they tell you to go find Joe down the street, who basically repeats everything you just heard, but in his voice, and the writing is mediocre because of it. The whole flex of having 250,000 lines of dialogue is not nearly as cool when the player's just sitting there eventually skipping through just to get to the point. That's sad, because I hardly ever skip dialogue in RPG games, but Starfield is so boring, the story of the expansion is so underwhelming that they try to sell it through the NPCs taking it way too seriously. And that's where Starfield has always fallen short. Gameplay? Great. Graphics? Unique. Exploration? It's alright. Story and writing? Incredibly boring. I get what Starfield was trying to accomplish with this expansion, but it falls short. Back with Dawnguard and Dragonborn, even after replaying Skyrim a dozen times, I still can't wait to go back there because the factions and characters are interesting. The storyline is engaging with good pacing, it's well written, it's the whole package deal. But honestly, what were we expecting? Back in the day, getting a new area to explore was awesome. But Starfield has taken all the charm out of that because they can just procedurally generate a planet and then slap a bunch of stuff in there to call it a day. When you shake this up to modern day expansions, well, you can't. Phantom Liberty is basically perfect in every way, and that came from a completely broken game. Shadow of the Erdtree managed to be an entirely new game. After Starfield's very lukewarm received launch, you'd think they'd try a bit harder with this, but at the end of the day, what you're getting here is more Starfield. Now, to expand a bit more on this, spoilers included, we're not getting anything new here at all. We're simply learning more about a faction in the game that still wasn't all that interesting in the main campaign. The whole story is about connecting with the Great Serpent through a speaker who has a big plan for their people, and you happen to be the one who can communicate the best, get the job done the best. Basically, you're better than everyone else and you should be running the show, but they still just insult you through it. Thing is, the first hour was excellent. Climbing through a zero-gravity space station that jumps through light speed, that was cool. Then you have about 4 hours of dialogue with a very few fights thrown in, probably just to keep the players entertained. But the problem? You basically forget why fighting these guys is important because the story falls so flat. I remember one quest, fighting through a facility to free some captured civilians to help one of the head faction leaders, and at one point you end up talking to a scientist for minutes of pointless dialogue that could have been summed up in, I'm important, I can shut down this facility to cut off the bad guys, also I have some friends still in here. But nope, you gotta listen to all the jokes, all the side tangents and whatnot. And because you don't really care about the character, it just makes it feel frustrating. Bethesda's gone from creating characters we cared about listening to the point where having 250,000 lines of dialogue sounded great at first, but the reality is you're left with characters that just ramble on, and then you never meet them ever again. Then you just run around doing more meaningless quests, one of them being so boring and mundane that I literally thought that I had accidentally started a side quest, and that's the campaign. You have to do 3 quests for 3 faction leaders, the best one being a mission where you go to a dam to figure out what's going on, and you end up fighting a bunch of egotistical ghosts. Nothing crazy, but it's certainly better than the other 2. And then you get to the campaign's finale. And it's actually fantastic. Bet you weren't expecting that, huh? I'm not kidding. You basically get to fight your way through this massive building filled with lots of interesting rooms, tons of stuff to check out, and the final boss fight is you taking down the head speaker by destroying this crazy radio tower on the top of a tower as you climb up it. It was a brutal fight on hard, but I'll admit it, I had a lot of fun, especially when you blow up everything, and now you get to fall down through the building as you're trying to escape, and there's just dozens of enemies fighting everywhere. And then it ends. Shattered Space isn't worth a $40 price tag at all, maybe $20 at most, but it doesn't bring anything new to the table besides a couple of weapons, some armor pieces, and a very quick campaign. Literally, it's just more Starfield. The game has always suffered from missing that charisma that Bethesda's previous RPGs carried with them, and I believe a massive part of that is that most of the characters are just boring. The story is interesting, I guess, but having to wander another planet that feels like one area is designed specifically for content, and then the rest of it is just another Starfield planet, you realize that this isn't really anything special being added. It feels like this could have just been a part of the base game, and nobody would have thought, wow, this feels really different and special. I went in expecting much more than a quick campaign, typical looking new village, and more dialogue than action, but Shattered Space proves that Bethesda might have just lost the drive to innovate and expand upon great ideas and worlds, focus so heavily on cramming in as much dialogue as possible without first getting our attention. When you compare this to the absolute marvel of how Phantom Liberty starts, characters immediately being interesting and an active part of the mission, great writing combined with insane amounts of action, you're already hooked. Shattered Space, however, falls quite short, never really hooking you, but expecting you to be engaged. I sincerely hope that Bethesda listens to feedback and does not take this approach with Elder Scrolls 6, realizing that this is not what people want.